Thanks again for joining us at the 2021 Sloan Sports Analytics Conference Competitive Advantage Talks, presented by Kager, also known as Craft Analytics Group. My name is Jack Blasberg, and I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan, and it's my pleasure to introduce our presentation, eNASCAR, the virtual fast track to fan engagement. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Tim Clark, Chief Digital Officer at NASCAR, to the stage.
Thank you, Jack. Appreciate the opportunity. Good to be with everyone today. What I want to do is jump into an overview of certainly an unusual circumstance around our season last year. And what I want to do is maybe set the stage on two things. First is the evolution of esports and NASCAR. And then secondly, the evolution of the 2020 season in NASCAR. And more importantly, where those two intersected and certainly what that means to the future of the sport. For us, interestingly enough, is 2020 eNASCAR and certainly iRacing became synonymous with NASCAR. The history of that is fairly lengthy and actually goes back more than 10 years. As like most things in NASCAR, there's an Earnhardt intersection. So interestingly enough, the iRacing software was developed initially as a simulation platform that became so realistic that drivers in real life were using it as a training tool. And one of the first to really embrace this was Dale Earnhardt Jr. And he was, interestingly enough, the person that made this available and made the suggestion to NASCAR, obviously years before esports was as prevalent as it is today, that NASCAR explored this partnership, which they did. So the roots of this esports partnership that exists between iRacing and NASCAR was actually rooted in real life racing, and became a partnership that existed over a number of years. And now let's take that and juxtapose it against the NASCAR season in 2020. So like most of you, our year or our season got off to somewhat of a normal start. Our season, as you guys understand, is a bit different from most sports. The Daytona 500 is our Super Bowl, and it kicks off the season. It's the first race of the season, and it certainly sets the tone for us. It sets the tone for audience engagement. It sets the tone for the level of excitement, the level of fan engagement and interest. And we had I guess it's fair to say, a very interesting start to 2020. So in the Daytona 500, we unfortunately had a rain delay that moved us from Sunday into Monday afternoon. And as many of you probably recall, seeing the end of that race was a horrific accident involving a few of our drivers, including Ryan Newman. And that the violence of that wreck and the spectacle of it really captured the attention of the country. And thankfully, so did Ryan's recovery and him walking out of the hospital 2 days later, hand in hand with his daughters. So if you talk about the start of the season and how much we were kind of gripped into the excitement and the very real danger of this sport, it's leading SportsCenter, it's leading every talk show, and we've got momentum, we've got some attention, because not only do you see the danger involved in the sport, but you see the safety protocols and the fact that a wreck like that, obviously you've got Ryan walking out of the hospital, thankfully, and showing the advancements that NASCAR has made in the sport. So now you fast forward a couple of weeks and you're off to a pretty good start, all things considered. And 3 weeks later, the world stops. And I think a lot of us will always recall where we were during that week. As you're seeing the NCAA tournament called off, you're seeing NBA basketball games stop with players on the court. And like the rest of the world, we're wondering, well, what are we going to do now? So Friday, March 13th, we announced the postponement of our upcoming races. And we are wondering how in the world we're going to move forward, not knowing what the next few weeks or the next few days was going to bring. And in that moment, a series of text messages and phone calls started, and we looked back on what we had in our arsenal, so to speak, and wondered what we could do. And that's when iRacing came back to the surface. So, there's conversations happening in real time of, could we make these races virtual? Is that possible? This is something that has existed for 12 years. This partnership has existed in the periphery of the sport. We'll get into some of these numbers later, but even among avid fans, iRacing is a bit of a niche. There's not something that's getting a lot of critical scale or is well known outside of kind of some tight circles within the sport. But here we are, and we have some conversations with iRacing, we have some conversations with some drivers, and we have some conversations with Fox. And literally 9 days from the first text message to execution, we formed the Pro Invitational Series with iRacing. So, I think looking back on that period of time, one of the things that impacted it in a positive way was the new workflow that I think now we're all a little bit used to, as no one is in an office, and no one is exploring the norms of meeting and pulling in a bunch of people. We just had to work differently. And I think looking back on how this whole thing evolved, I think that's what made it successful, that we didn't have an opportunity to overthink it. We all acknowledged that we were in a situation that we had never been in before, and there was no blueprint for. But everybody rolled up their sleeves and had a positive attitude, and we were able to get this up and running in a really short period of time. The events were virtual, but they felt very real. I think a lot of you most likely and hopefully experienced this, but what we saw from across the board, and even from a Fox perspective, this is a group of people that have never produced an esports event, and number two, weren't really allowed to operate under their normal protocols and coming into the studio. So the fact that happened over again a 10-day period of time, where you had Fox resources and NASCAR resources and drivers jumping in to pull something off that had never happened before, was really quite remarkable. And of all of the things that you wouldn't think of in putting on an esports event under that period of time, JJ Watt is giving a command to start engines, and Rita Wilson is performing national anthems. You've got DraftKings and sportsbook operators that are taking action on these events that didn't exist 9 days ago. I think even looking back on it, it's really hard to comprehend how quickly this came together, and how everyone really jumped in to pull it off. You had outlets like New York Times and Washington Post covering what we're doing in a virtual world, and it really reestablished that trajectory that the sport was on. You have retired drivers, Hall of Fame drivers, that are participating in these events. You have our current drivers that are embracing this and live streaming from their living rooms or wherever they are. You've got Denny Hamlin's daughter who clicks the wrong button on the remote right in the middle of one of these races and turns off his simulator. These things that you would never comprehend, that you couldn't possibly fathom when, again, a week and a half ago, we're all faced with the realization that our sport was going to have to come to a pause. So how do these events perform? Again, no expectations going into these broadcasts, never been done before, something that 2 weeks prior we would have never even comprehended doing. They set records. What we found out a couple of days after that first broadcast is that it became the number one most highly viewed esports broadcast in U.S. television history. So from no expectations to that in a week and a half is certainly something we're very proud of. And what was interesting to see how that progressed over the next couple of weeks is the only way that those records were broken were by the future events. So as we put on more events and more races through the Pro Invitational Series, the records continued to be broken, and we're averaging 1 million viewers for each of these events. 75% clearance rate from Fox affiliates. So as programming is being disrupted across all outlets and all broadcast partners. There's plenty of programming that can be picked up. There's government updates. There's public updates across all of these state and local affiliates, and 75% affiliates picked up this Fox broadcast. And I think maybe more importantly than any of that is the fact that it allowed us to span the entirety of the gap from the time that real race cars and real race tracks weren't happening. So if you look at the start of the season and that rating for the Daytona 500 that was impacted by rain, again, like we talked about earlier, that sets the stage for the full season. So we get 4 races under our belt, we're off 10%, and then we go into this 2-month span where we have no racing. And I think the data shows, and I think we all firmly believe here, that having the Pro Invitational Series that maintained relevance and captured attention and even drove a new audience, having that gap sustained with programming on our Fox affiliates, I think allowed the attention span to maintain. We didn't fall out of relevance. We didn't fall out of habit, and we even picked up new viewers. So when we returned the following week, 2 months later, the rating that you see there for our Darlington return race is the highest non-Daytona 500 rating that we had seen since 2017. So, the fact that we're able to not only sustain but actually grow really changed the complexion of that season from a negative into something that we could turn into a positive. So what else did we see? I mentioned a new audience. I think of all of the numbers on this visual that you're looking at today, the one that I think blew us away the most is 30% of this audience is brand new. They had not watched a NASCAR race. So the fact that we were able to sustain with our current audience and then find a whole new segment of the audience that's tuning in because of these esports events is incredible, and I think is going to pay dividends for years to come. You've got something like a broadcast in almost 160 countries. And as impactful as that is on its own, there's a story like a partnership with Tencent. So Tencent was not distributing NASCAR content as hard as we had tried for the past several years. They see the buzz of what's happening with the Pro Invitational Series, and they begin distributing those events. And that partnership has continued. So as we go into the 2021 season, now Tencent is distributing live NASCAR races. So, that in and of itself is a huge impact on the sport's future. We're seeing younger audiences. 18 to 49 was the demo that was the most engaged in not only the live races, but the shoulder programming and the ancillary content. By virtue of having a younger audience, they're more social. 5.5 billion social media impressions through the course of the Pro Invitational Series. We talked about the New York Times and Washington Post and other outlets, 27,000 earned media mentions. Our avid fans, almost 60% of our avid fans had not seen iRacing before. And more importantly, once they did see it, they either liked it or loved it and wanted more of it. iRacing benefits from this. So 130% increase in iRacing memberships, which we'll talk about the importance of that in just a moment. But across the board, Fox is able to fulfill ad impressions. This is just a situation where we talked a lot about making lemonade out of lemons. You go into a situation that is unfortunately impacting so many people in such a negative way, and to have so many people jump on board of moving something in a positive direction was not only impactful in the moment, but I truly believe will be impactful going forward. So from a sponsorship perspective, a couple of examples. The one in the middle, Dixie Vodka, was a race entitlement partner for a race that was supposed to happen in real life in Miami. Once that race went virtual, so did their sponsorship. So the Dixie Vodka 400 became the Dixie Vodka 150 on the Pro Invitational Series. That sponsorship and partnership exists today. Blue Emu was a driver named Landon Castle who picked up this Blue Emu sponsorship during the Pro Invitational Series and was streaming on Twitch with an incredible kind of impromptu brand association. That partnership exists. So as we hit the track this year to start the 21 season, Blue Emu became Landon Castle's sponsor on the track. So much so that in real races, that paint scheme was a nod back to the paint scheme that they had developed for the Pro Invitational Series in a virtual environment. Pit Boss was a sponsor of a driver named Timmy Hill, who is not maybe one of the more well-known drivers, but won a Pro Invitational Series event, which is huge for that team and that driver. It also became huge for Pit Boss, who then became the sponsor of Stuart Haas and Eric Almirola. And interestingly enough, not only are they sponsoring his real race car, but they're going to sponsor his virtual race car in some future iRacing events. So where do we go from here? Based on what we saw and based on what our partners saw and based on the success of what you saw from, sports betting handle, from ad revenue to sponsorships to identifying new fans, everyone kind of agreed at the end of last year as we went back to real racing that this was not an anomaly, that this was not something that should go away when the world kind of gets back to some degree of normalcy. So we'll bring it back this year. 2021, we'll see 10 races, 5 on Fox and 5 on NBC. We'll bring our drivers back. The fact that our drivers are able to show some personality, that they can race without the helmet, without the fire suit, so to speak, where they're able to show their personalities and not only influence new fans, but influence new sponsors. Midweek content. Traditionally NASCAR is a Saturday or Sunday sport. The fact that we can create an entertaining broadcast and put that on Wednesdays opens up a world of possibilities for us to continue adding more value for our media partners. We have another iRacing series that's sponsored by Coca-Cola that, again, is part of a development. I mean, we're talking about the opportunity for us to develop not only the next generation of fan, but the next generation of drivers through this platform. And then the continued expansion for eNASCAR certainly includes partnerships with other gaming titles and making these games available on consoles. So we'll continue to use this as a huge pillar for our growth of the sport. And I think if you look at the learnings that we had from this, and as important as it was and impactful as it was in 2020, what do we do in 2021? And what do we do over the next 3 years and 5 years and 10 years for the sport's future? There is an application for iRacing to develop the car that will be seen on the track for the first time in 2022. The next gen race car is developed today in iRacing. There are drivers that are testing that setup today and have been testing it since last year to provide real-time feedback to engineers, to our competition officials. So the car that you'll see on track in 2022 has got some roots in esports. Same with tracks. Imagine the expense of developing new tracks or generating new tracks. This year, we'll take an iconic track in Bristol and turn it to dirt. That's available as a test opportunity within iRacing. We can get our drivers to construct tracks that don't exist today. One of the things we didn't talk about is of those events, they happened on tracks that exist today and also happened on a track like North Wilkesboro that doesn't exist today. So you've got real NASCAR drivers racing on a track that doesn't exist in real life today. And what can we do for the evolution of the sport with that at our disposal? And the driver, I mean, there's a very real possibility that the 2034 NASCAR champion started in iRacing last year by virtue of the Pro Invitational, whether it's from viewing those events or being part of that 130% increase in iRacing's membership. That there's a very, very real possibility that not only the fan but the driver of the future for our sport was identified during a very real problematic time for our society. That again, we were able to make lemonade out of lemons. So all things considered, just an incredible ride over the 2020 season. I think we said from the very beginning, and I think this ended up being true. We wanted to come out of it better than we went into it. And partnerships like the one that we have with iRacing and the engagement that we've got with partners like Fox, and really the momentum from our drivers and our teams and the industry at large allowed us to do that. So Extraordinarily happy with what we saw, incredibly excited and bullish on the future, and the uniqueness of this platform and esports and this virtual environment of how we can move together into a very real future is something we're incredibly excited about. So appreciate everyone's time and look forward to talking again soon.